Welcome to Total Picture Radio, today's Leadership Channel podcast and vodcast. Yes, we're shooting video as well. With Nicholas Carlson is brought to you by Recruitify. With Recruitify, you can easily connect with top recruiters and passive candidates interested in exploring new opportunities. Use the link on Nich's show page, and Recruitify will waive the $50 listing fee for your first jobcast. That's Recruitify. www.recruitify.com/Clayton. On contributing editor to Inc. magazine Jeffrey James' recent article titled 7 Books You Should Pre-Order Today, you'll find Marissa Mayers and the Fight to Save Yahoo by our guest Nicholas Carlson on this Leadership Channel podcast on Total Picture Radio. Actually, there's no need to pre-order as the book was just released. Nich is Business Insider's chief correspondent. As I was saying to Nich previous to starting to record, there are not very many business books that I get that are what I would call page turners, but believe me, this is one. And the publisher, 12, was kind enough to send me 2 review copies of the book. So if you would like one, and here it is right here, just be the first to comment on this interview on Nich's show page, and I'll be happy to send you the book. But please, this is limited to those with U.S. mailing addresses only. Nich, welcome to Total Picture Radio.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
Oh, I'm the chief correspondent of Business Insider. I've been here for 6 years. I just am fascinated by stories. That's the main thing that I'm after. And people in the technology industry, that's typically who I write about. I've written about Marissa Mayers and Tim Armstrong and Larry Page, and these kind of figures are fascinating to me. And boy, is Marissa Mayers one of them.
You don't seem to have very much furniture in your office there, Nich.
I'm in a conference room, actually.
Oh, okay.
I have a standing desk in the middle of the BI newsroom, along with almost everybody. We have a lot of standing desks in Business Insider.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so the opening scene of your book is truly bizarre. It's sort of Monty Python meets reality TV or something. Can you describe for our listeners, Bobby Had a Nickel?
Oh, yeah. So the opening, that's crazy, right? So the opening scene takes place in Yahoo's very large cafeteria, where Mayers was holding a company-wide meeting, and it was just a little bit more than a year into her tenure. Her first year just went really well in terms of fixing Yahoo's culture. You'll remember all of a sudden all the employees got free iPhones and Samsung Galaxies, and it was very exciting.
Right.
Free food and all these things. She also got Yahoo's product shipping schedule going much faster. Before she got there, it took 18 months to launch a new version of Yahoo email. When she got there, they launched one in 6 months, and the next version in 3 months, and the next version in 3 months again. So she got the place moving fast and the culture fixed. But instead, when she was hired, she promised the board, and she told, and lots of people were suggesting that Mayers should fire 5,000 people from Yahoo. They thought that the company really needed to shrink to perform. And Mayers decided not to do this. Instead, her method for controlling costs and weeding out underperformers was to institute stack rankings. And this was very controversial. And so by the fall of 2013, but just more than a year into her tenure, employees were pretty upset. And they asked her if they could do a question and answer session in which employees would submit questions anonymously, and Mayers would go on stage and answer them. And so in late October, the questions came in, and they were really, really harsh. Like people, and these are in the book. People were asking questions about was the executive staff going to have to go through the same rigorous stack ranking? Why were teams where everyone was performing? Why would you have to come up with lower performers when everyone was performing? And they were angry because it was limiting promotions, and this really was, hit these people in the wallet. And so they had all these questions, and Mayers goes on stage, and everyone's expecting her to answer the questions. But instead of answering them, she sits on stage and she starts to read them a children's book called Bobby Had a Nickel. And it's like a very simplistic children's book, even for a children's book. I mean, it's like about this little kid with a nickel, and should he buy an ice cream cone, or should he, buy a rubber ball? And then eventually he spends money on going on a Ferris wheel. not a Ferris wheel, merry-go-round. And Meyer was trying to make a point about how she had loved her experience at Yahoo so far, but that point, which is even sort of not a point that really needed to be made at that moment, that point didn't even come through at all. And employees just, thousands of them were sitting there just sort of like with their mouths open, being like, what? And so really it was the moment the honeymoon ended for Marissa Mayer at Yahoo.
Yeah, and reading your book, apparently she had wet hair and she wasn't wearing any makeup.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so this is an interesting detail that, one of the reasons I'm fascinated with Marissa Mayer is that she is just full of contradictions. She's apparently she's regarded as this person who is very analytical, in data oriented around making decisions about how Gmail should be designed or something like that. Mm-hmm. But then she got in charge of Yahoo's media business and she started making calls from her gut. She's also viewed as this person who, she's in the pages of Vogue in very glamorous photo spreads.
Right.
But then
in designer wardrobe, right?
Exactly. Yeah. She's a renowned. She's known for her admiration of Oscar de la Renta. Mm-hmm. But so during some of the biggest meetings in her life, she shows up sort of her hair wet and no makeup, and she's when she signed her $200 million contract to join Yahoo, she showed up. It was all these like fancy lawyers and board members from New York in this law office in Palo Alto. They all show up in limousines and they're sleek looking, and they got their business attire on. Meyer shows up in a 10-year-old beat up green BMW. Her hair's wet. As she's done signing, she's like, "All right, I need to go clean out my office at Google." And her and the handlers from New York, these New York types, were like, "Well, do you want us to send people with you? Do you need a car?" She's like, "Nah, I got it. My mom's gonna help. My mom's gonna help clean out the office." So she's just a really fascinating person. And yes, that day on stage at Yahoo, she was sort of frazzled looking. And it's funny, just for your women readers, it sort of sounds weird for a man to be talking about a woman's hair being wet and judging it. And I'm not trying to judge it. It's something that actually women who worked with Meyer at Yahoo, they kept noting it over and over in several different situations. So I thought, okay, so this is a detail people care about. Hair wet, who knows?
Right, right. Yeah, Nich, I really want you to go into a little bit more detail about the stack ranking, which, from what I understand, was called QPR's Quarterly Performance Reviews, which was, similar to the much criticized stack reviews that Microsoft had for many years. And I guess they were all trying to emulate Jack Welch or something. But, especially my audience would be really interested in how this completely blew up at Yahoo.
Yeah, there was. I mean, I'm sure everyone's aware of the trend that sort of Jack Welch initiated with. I think he called it, or someone called it for him, rank and yank. Like you rank employees, you grade them, and then you just take out the bottom.
10% goes away. Yeah, every year.
Just fire them.
Yeah.
And so Meyer, it's interesting to think about, but she has had one company that she worked for before she went to Yahoo. She worked at Google, and she was there since she was 23 until she was about 37. And there they have a thing called OKRs, which are sort of very similar to all this. It's just very clear goals, and then you go over them and you agree to them with your supervisor, and then at the end of the quarter you sort of review how you did, and that really determines your compensation and it gives you a grade and how can you do versus promotions and transfers and raises and all those kinds of things. And so she came into Yahoo and rightly so thought that the company needed to increase its accountability and transparency. At the same time, she also thought the company needed to weed out some of its underperformers and cut costs. So whereas at Google, you have OKRs, and it's just sort of like they're done per person, and there's not really sort of like an overall system saying who needs to have what grades. Meyer thought at Yahoo a better idea would be to have a forced curve, like a distribution. So a certain amount of people in every group, in every large group, needed to be in, I think it's like 15% needed to be A plus, she used numbers 1 through 5. So 15% needed to be in the top rank, and 15% needed to be in the bottom rank, and sort of, like a bell curve. So what happens is the problem with this is that what happens is you can have a high performing team, and you still need to find someone who's an underperformer.
Mm-hmm.
And so people felt like they were being unfairly maligned. And then you have other problems too, which are that the other problem, speaking to a bunch of Yahoo sources, what they told me, the other problem is that talented people didn't want to work together, because if you're going onto a team where there's a person who's definitely going to be a 5, well, that eliminates one slot for being a 5, and so that means that you're possibly going to be stuck at the bottom rung. And then the other interesting thing is that people didn't want to switch. They didn't want to go to a new team to work on a new group, because they would have their quarterly goals. And then right in the middle of that, they would go and have new quarterly goals at another group, and it was hard to establish yourself, and so it kind of felt like you're leaving a job half done, and then you go and you maybe don't get the best grades because you're moving in the middle of it. It's just, the stack ranking is a thing that it's really interesting. Meyer was really rolling out stack ranking in the winter. There's a scene in the book where she's announcing stack ranking, and it's December 2012, which is right when Microsoft started to roll them back, and there was an article in Vanity Fair about stack ranking being a terrible idea. And one of the employees said, to Meyer in front of the entire company, is this such a good idea? I think I'm reading a lot of things about how stack ranking doesn't work. And Meyer goes, oh, it's not stack ranking. We're not doing stack ranking. And she's technically correct, because it's not like they're not literally saying they're not literally ranking the employees in a group 1 through 10. But if you have a forced distribution of performers, it's effectively the same thing. So it was an interesting situation where Meyer was saying one thing and being technically accurate and kind of being blind to the nuances, which is that is one thing about her. She sees the world in black and white.
In reading your book, I want to do a little bit of a rewind here. I think many of us have forgotten about the phenomenal meteoric rise of Yahoo in the mid to late 90s. You describe a wonderful scene in which took place in January of 1996 at the Super Bowl. Could you share Sparky's moment in the sun with us, please?
That's great. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people are really interested in all the Marissa Mayers stuff, but I had a lot of fun writing about the history of Yahoo, which is about 100 pages in the book.
Right.
Maybe a little bit more. And yes, Yahoo for a time was the internet. And so there's this character in the book, from real life. His name's Jeff Mallett, and he was Yahoo's irrepressible COO for its first many years. Because of Jeff Mallett, his efforts, the company really, he was one of the little engine inside the company, getting it to make hundreds of products. He was also a big business development guy, and there's this scene where it's the 1996 Super Bowl, and Jeff Mallett is, Yahoo's still a very new company, and he's at the Super Bowl, and he walks out, and he sees all these promotions that they put on seats at the Super Bowl, and they're all Yahoo purple, and inside the package is a little CD which has Yahoo pre-installed, and he's just thrilled by the notion that Yahoo is one of these brands that's playing alongside of humongous brands I can't remember if it's Pepsi or Coke, but it was one of those two, and Budweiser, and it's just sort of the beginning of the massive rise of Yahoo to becoming a $128 billion company. People forget, but Yahoo was Google, it was Facebook, it was the big dominant internet company.
Right. Yeah, and at the time that this took place, Yahoo had 50 employees. 50.
Yeah.
Think about that. We all know what Super Bowl ads cost, right? But and it's really interesting because during this whole .com explosion in the late 90s out in Silicon Valley, first of all, if you had a pulse, you could get a job somewhere. And secondly, there were companies like Pet.com and all of these internet startups buying Super Bowl ads.
Right. So speaking of having a pulse and getting a job, but one of the fun things that I learned reporting in the book was that unlike so Google would just crawl the web using computers, but in the beginning when Yahoo was a directory, website owners would email Yahoo and say, hey, could you list my website on your directory? And Yahoo had dozens of college students just going through reading these emails and putting them on the website, like literally like listing them in a very handmade fashion. So it's, it was incredible just sort of how Yahoo was built in the beginning to become a massive website.
Let's revisit the .com bust of 2000 and specifically what happened to Yahoo in that time period.
Yeah, so Yahoo had all this attention, and it was getting. I mean, it was the most popular website, and it really had this power to distribute traffic to smaller startups and advertisers. And what it would do is it would take money from a startup to be that startup, like a flowers provider, would be the official provider for flower services for Yahoo users, and it would get a link on the homepage. And it was crazy because what would happen is a startup would get a partnership with Yahoo, and then it would be able to IPO,
right?
And and it would have a huge IPO just because it had this partnership with Yahoo. So it was this cycle where little companies would take venture money, and then they would put it into a deal with Yahoo, and then they would go public, and both companies' values would explode. Obviously, this was a bubble, and the bubble burst for startups, and all of a sudden, all the venture capital money went away, and that advertising was not sustainable, useful advertising, and the startups all flopped, and there went Yahoo's ad revenues, and the company went from $128 billion market cap down to like about $8 or $9 billion within a year, and it just totally imploded.
And I think it would be really instructive for you to talk a little bit about Yahoo's early collaboration with Google and how AdWords just completely turned the whole search industry upside down overnight.
Yes. Yeah. It's amazing, but as doing this book, like you start to think about like, why is Yahoo not the dominant company, and why is Google the dominant company? You look at fate, and like one little reason why Google won and Yahoo lost and changed the lives of so many people is that Google was better at listing the order in which it put its ads on search results pages. Google would so let's start with Yahoo. What Yahoo did is it would put ads on the page so like say you search for cars, you just type in cars, and Ford and Chevrolet and BMW all want to buy ads. Yahoo would list the ads on the page based on whoever was willing to pay the highest price per click, period. That's it. It was a pure auction model. It would go, say BMW is going to pay the most, it gets at the top. Now, Google was smarter. They were smarter about it. What Google did was Google optimized just for yield. They optimized they didn't just make it simply a pay, highest bidder. They would look at it, and if BMW was willing to pay $1 per click, but Ford was willing to pay 50 cents per click, but more than twice as many people were clicking on Ford ads, Google would put the Ford ad on top. So, then it's simple math, right? So more than twice as much, even if it's half as much per click, that's more money. And so Google figured this out, and Yahoo didn't. And what that meant was that Google was immediately making more money on its search traffic than Yahoo was. And so Google could in turn, pay for distribution of its search of its search engine. So it could go to ISPs, internet service providers, and say, we're going to pay you more than Yahoo could possibly pay you to be your default search engine provider. So it was people at Microsoft and Yahoo were sort of like sitting there stunned watching what Google was doing. It was a business where the more Google spent, the more it made. And it's a funny reason, just to get a little bit granular here, that I discovered the reason why Yahoo didn't do this was because in trying to compete with Google, it bought a company that did the algorithmic search, like the search when you type in a search, the natural results that come up from the web, and then it bought a company called something click. My brain just went. But anyway, it bought a search ad company, Overture. It bought Overture, so it bought two companies, right? And so the funny thing that happened was that Overture Ink2Me, which was the algorithmic company, was a client. Actually, I think it was Overture. Excuse me, sorry. Overture was a client of Microsoft's also. It was providing search for Microsoft, and Yahoo thought it would alienate Microsoft, a big client of Overture's, if it integrated both Overture and Ink2Me. And so it took this fancy search scientists who were really working on algorithmic search and took those people and had them work with Overture. And so in the end, it didn't have its best scientists working on ad serving, whereas Google had its most brilliant people working on both problems at the same time. And that's like the simple reason why Google was better at organizing its search ads than Yahoo was, and why I wrote a book called Marissa Mayers and the Fight to Save Yahoo, and Google's doing just fine.
Isn't it true that there were several opportunities in the early 2000s for Yahoo to buy Google?
Yes. Well, it's kind of funny. That's one of the myths that I think I sort of was able to debunk. So there was a lot of reporting. In fact, there was a New York Times story, sort of right when Terry Semel was let go sort of resigned, let go, fired, whatever, from Yahoo. The Times went after him and said, like, his biggest mistake was not being able to buy Google. Mm-hmm. And in my reporting, I think I pretty much nailed that. I don't think Google was ever going to sell. I think Google liked getting big offers from Yahoo, but Larry Page and Sergey Brin were not about to let that company go. And it's hard. It's easy to believe that because, and this is like people on Yahoo's deals team that I spoke to from that era. They just sort of said, look, we went back and we would double our offer, double it again, and Google would be like, nah. But just imagine the circumstance I was just describing, where Google's usage was exploding. The more money they could take the money they were earning, spend it, and get a lot more back. Why would they sell? I mean, and Larry Page didn't want to go work for somebody. Now, what is true is that very early on in the development of Google, like literally its first year or so, Larry Page didn't really want to go become a CEO of a company. He wanted to go and finish his degree and become a professor like his father had been. And that was very important to him personally. And he was willing to sell Google for about $1 million. And Google decided not to. I mean, Yahoo decided not to buy it. That's in the book too. So there is that one instance where they could have done it, but later it was just it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. Well, that sort of reminds me of the studio executive who passed on Home Alone. Right?
Yeah.
All right. So in 2008, why did Yahoo pass on Microsoft's very generous offer to buy the company?
Yeah. This was a fun one because I covered this story pretty closely back in 2008, and it was fun to go back to these people and be like, okay, it's been a little while. Tell me what actually happened. And the impression I get, I mean, not impression. What I understand after speaking to these sources is that Roy Bostock, the chairman of Yahoo at the time, had a very, very just sort of militantly oppositional, like from the minute this big offer came in from Microsoft. One source talked to me about this scene and it's in the book, where Bostock goes and gets on the phone with all of Yahoo's senior executives, and he says, our stance is going to be combative. And people were just floored. They're like, this is a big offer. Like, maybe we don't want to sell. Maybe there are reasons not to sell, but why are we going to be combative? And it really poisoned the well, and talks just never really got going. Like from the beginning, Yahoo CEO Jerry Yang and Bostock were very just like, we're not doing it. And it poisoned the well. And there's the ultimate scene in the book is where, not the book, but this story is where Jerry Yang and David Filo fly up to Microsoft's to meet with Microsoft at an airport hangar and meet with Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft at the time. And Ballmer just, there was ups and downs in the share prices. Probably Microsoft was willing to go higher on the share price. And Ballmer just goes like, are you guys with me? Like, do you want to do this deal if we can come to the right price? And Filo and Yang gave him the impression, whatever they said, they gave, I don't have the exact verbiage, unfortunately, but whatever they said, they gave him the distinct impression, no, we're not all rowing in the same direction, and the deal died right there.
Yeah. We're going to fast forward, and believe me, we're passing on many juicy stories with names like The Godfather and the Peanut Butter Manifesto to part 2 of your book. So tell us about Marissa's early years. with Google? The 100-hour work week stuff.
Yeah. Meyer was a star student at Stanford, and she kind of had her pick of jobs. She could have gone off and become a professor. She had a chance to, I think it was work with McKinsey, some star consulting, some big consulting firm. And then there was this little startup called Google that her professor said that maybe she should look into, and it terrified her. And she has this rule, which is a great rule, that anytime you're just really scared of a job opportunity or something, you should do it, because that's the one that's going to be the most exciting and challenging. And so she went to Google, and she went to Google as an intern coder, 22, 23 years old. And she was hot stuff at Stanford as a coder, but then she got to Google and she started working on a number of projects. In one project in particular, it took her months to kind of get it going in the right direction. She was actually building the original, I think, check me on this, it's in the book, it's right in the book, but I might be wrong in the interview. But I think it was Google's first ad system. She was working on it. And it took her months to do it. And then this guy named Jeff Dean came in. And he's a renowned coder from DEC. And people were stunned that Google was able to hire him. And he came in and did the whole project in 3 weeks. And Meyer sort of like reflected on this and said she loved working at Google already. And she was like, what can I do to like be useful to this company and be a star? And it's not going to be coding. And so she did something very smart, which is she threw herself at every problem the company had, from marketing, product development, to, just really whatever she could. And she eventually became Larry Page's like right hand executive, and got herself in charge of something called the user interface review. So every time a Google product was going to go live, it had to go through Meyer first. And so she really was very instrumental in like what we know of as Google today. And then the final, that took her very far. Gmail, Google Maps, Google Search. She was just very instrumental in the creation of those products. And then the second way that she sort of rose to great power at Google was by launching this So Google was having a hard time hiring the right people. It was hiring a lot of MBAs, actually. And, Marissa Mayers' boss kept trying to hire MBAs and take them to Larry Page, the CEO of Google, and Page hated all the hires. And finally, Mayers said to her boss, she said, you're hiring the wrong people. What you should be doing is you should be hiring technical people like me who have a real interest in becoming CEOs someday. And the Mayers' boss said, that sounds like a great idea. You're in charge of getting those people into the company. And so she ran with it, and she created a program called the Associate Product Manager Program and hired lots of really talented technical people to become product managers. And these people spread throughout Google, and they had bosses that were their actual technical bosses. But Meyer was the one who brought them into the company, hired them, tutored them, took them on class trips even. And so they all still basically reported to Meyer. So she had this ability she had lieutenants spread throughout Google, and this made her very powerful at the company.
When she was hired as the new CEO of Yahoo in 2012, she was not the only person being considered for the job. Didn't Ross Levinson, the interim CEO, think he was really going to get the job?
Yeah, I mean, the reason Ross Levinson thought that is because the chairman of Yahoo at the time told him it was his job to lose. But the funny thing about the chairman back then, and his name for some reason is slipping my mind at the moment, but that chairman was not really the most powerful and biggest voice on the board. That was Dan Loeb and his colleague Michael Wolff, who came on as active. Dan Loeb was an activist investor in Yahoo. He bought a 5% stake in the summer of 2011 and blew up Yahoo's board. He basically got its CEO fired by discovering that the CEO had misled people had allowed people to believe that he had a computer science degree from Stonehill College, but he did not. And there's a scene in my book where Loeb drops a public letter, in which he reveals this, and all of Yahoo's executives are in a room, and all of a sudden their BlackBerries start lighting up, and they're like, "Oh my God!" Because Kara Swisher, the longtime Yahoo reporter, had revealed this letter, and that was it for Scott Thompson. So Dan Loeb took over the board, And he and Michael Wolff wanted to hire someone who could make Yahoo more of like a products company that made flashy, cool web tools that billions of people wanted to use the way that Facebook or Google do. They hired Meyer because she was more like a Larry Page, more like a Mark Zuckerberg.
Nich, where do you think Yahoo would be today without Alibaba?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, so, in 2005, Yahoo invested $1 billion in Alibaba. Now Alibaba, after having sold half of it, Yahoo's Alibaba stake is worth something like $50 billion. So, right. Probably that stake is worth, that original investment would now be worth $100 billion. And so, wow. In some ways, it'd be interesting if there were no Alibaba, then there would have been no interest from Dan Loeb to join the Yahoo board and get Marissa Mayers on board. Probably the company would have had to focus more on what actually, instead of allowing this distraction of Alibaba to raise the stock price by a lot, things would have gotten much worse at Yahoo much quicker. But maybe that means things would have hit rock bottom, which is kind of what Yahoo needs to do. It needs to shrink to a point where it is undervalued as a core asset. And then people start to get realistic about what can be done with Yahoo. And maybe someone like Ross Levinson would have become the CEO instead. Because what he really wanted to do, he was a senior executive at Yahoo. He wanted to take the whole thing private and fire thousands of people and just sort of lever the what it had, which is a large audience, and maybe strike partnership deals with companies like Hulu and Vivo, the music video site, mm-hmm. and try to take advantage of that audience rather than trying to become something that Yahoo no longer is.
All right, so put on your crystal ball, and tell us how you think this is all going to play out.
So I've been asked a lot about what my prediction for Yahoo is, and I think that Meyer is, it's not a spoiler to reveal what happens at the end of the book because it's reality, and anybody can do a little research and find out. So Meyer had this opportunity that no turnaround CEO has when she joined the company in 2012. This is really the story of the book over its last third, at least, is people who were investing in Yahoo during her first 2 years were investing in Yahoo because of its stake in Alibaba, right, a fast-growing Chinese company. And they weren't really concerned with the core business and its performance. So she had a chance to get the core business smaller, and leaner, and meaner, and get revenues growing again. She could have actually done something drastic, fire 5,000 people, allow revenues to shrink so that the comparisons going forward were favorable. And instead of doing that, she kind of kept Yahoo bloated and revenues didn't really grow. And so when Alibaba finally IPO'd and investors were no longer were turning their attention back to Yahoo, Yahoo was in a situation, and Meyer is right now, where Alibaba's a public company. Yahoo could sell all of its stock in Alibaba and use the money to invest in Meyer's plan for how Yahoo should grow. And investors aren't enthusiastic about that, given the performance of Yahoo during Meyer's first 2 years. They would rather her take those billions of dollars and just give them back to shareholders, please. And so she's under enormous pressure from shareholders to do that. And one plan that shareholders put forward so that to quote, monetize the stake as best as possible in a tax-efficient manner is to split Yahoo into two companies. One would be a large, and actually much larger holding company for Yahoo's Asian assets, its stake in Yahoo Japan and Alibaba. And then the other company would be the Yahoo core business, which is the one that actually Marissa Mayers runs. So the plan's been put forward by shareholders, and it's my prediction, and I think it would be great for Mayers, and that's why I think she should do it. I think interests are aligned, is to split the company into two. You have a large holding company that has the Yahoo's Asian assets in it, its Alibaba stake, and also its half ownership in Yahoo Japan. And then you have the small core business that Marissa Mayers runs. And I think if she can get over sort of the ego blow of running a much smaller company, that allows her to, she would then be able to take this board of directors that really admires her with her. She would be able to grow from a much smaller base. And so I think that's what will happen, and I think that's a good outcome for Marissa Mayers.
One last question for you, Nich. Is there anything in doing your research and in writing this book that absolutely blew your mind that you hadn't realized going into this project?
So this is the thing that surprised me most writing this book was there's a portrayal in the press of Yahoo's former CEOs, Terry Semel and Carol Bartz, as sort of like cartoonishly outdated people who were kind of dumb and didn't really know what they were doing, and they were bad CEOs, and why did Yahoo ever hire them? But in doing the reporting for this book, what I found was that these people had amazing careers before Yahoo. Carol Bartz was a Wisconsin farm girl and got herself involved in computer enterprise sales, and was a woman doing this at a time when women didn't do that, and had bosses who, she became the boss of people who refused to work for a woman, and she rose up through the ranks of major software corporations, and then she took over Autodesk, which was a very troubled company because of a contentious sort of irascible founder, and she turned it around in a quite remarkable story. So she's brilliant and a really capable executive. And then there's Terry Semel, who there's a story in my book about how he didn't really use email, and so maybe he wasn't the right hire for Yahoo, but he's no dummy. When he was in Hollywood, he could have had any. He left he was the CEO of Warner Movies, and when he quit, he could have had any job in Hollywood he wanted.
Right.
He was a star, and he went to Yahoo at the behest of the board that wanted him to turn Yahoo into a media company. And so maybe the board was more at fault than perhaps Terry Semel. And he was just a very talented, brilliant person. And so that's really what surprised me. And it also comments on Marissa Mayers. So Marissa Mayers is a star executive. She's a rock star. She might not be able to turn around Yahoo, but like with Bartz and like with Semel, it might be more Yahoo's fault than Marissa Mayers' fault, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And let's face it, we all know CEOs who have their assistants print out their emails for them, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, the book is Marissa Mayers and the Fight to Save Yahoo, just published by 12. It's really an incredibly fascinating look at Silicon Valley, and I highly recommend reading it. Nich, thank you so much for speaking with us today.